Okay, anytime.
I am Amy Lang, and this is an interview with Alan Eisenberg. Today is October 13th, 2004. Before we get into the meat of this interview, I have to comment on your hat. I love your hat. Are you a hat person? Is this a trademark of Alan Eisenberg?
It didn't start out that way, but it is today. I first began wearing hats when I had a real bad summer, and this is quite a long time ago, and I was taken to the hospital 3 times for heat stroke.
Oh dear.
And I realized that even slight sunlight, even if it's an overcast day, can do that to you. And then I also discovered that same year from a doctor friend of mine that one loses the heat in their body through their head.
Mm-hmm.
So I've worn hats in the summer and hats in the winter most of my life. And wherever I go in the world, other countries, other states, I always look for a hat store to shop at.
Interesting.
And I'm proud to tell you that the best hat store in the entire world is here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Women's hats too?
Women's hats too.
And
They have an extraordinary supply in stock, large supply.
Is it here in Milwaukee?
It's 10 minutes from where you're sitting.
Uh-huh. Can we divulge the name?
Oh yeah, it's called Heads Up.
Heads Up. Wonderful.
And I became a hat collector, and
How many hats do you think you own?
probably 30 or 40, at least 30 or 40. But I don't get to pick out the hat that I wear. My wife is a designer, so.
Oh, and so she picked. Wonderful. Okay. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about your background. Were you born here in Milwaukee?
I was born at Mount Sinai Hospital.
Right here in Milwaukee. And
Right.
your parents were from?
My mother was from New York, and my dad was born in Milwaukee.
Really?
Yes.
Your mother was born in New York herself, or she had immigrated?
She was born in New York.
That's unusual. And your grandparents?
This is a little confusing because I had 2 mothers.
Oh, okay.
My biological mother, her parents came from Rome, Italy, via Argentina. And my father's grandparents were born in Austria.
Mm-hmm. Rome, Italy via Argentina, way
Mhm.
back in probably around the turn of the century, or?
Before.
Before.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And so your parents, your mother was from New York, your dad was from Milwaukee, and how did they meet?
They met because my mother's family had moved to Milwaukee. My mother and father both went to State Teachers College, which is now UWM.
I see. So they met in school.
They met in school.
And by this
As a
time?
matter of fact, they both worked for the school newspaper, which was called the Echo.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was the business manager, or business editor, business manager, both, and my mother was the editor.
And that's where they met. And they were married soon after, or?
I don't know how long afterward. I assume so. I don't have the date of their marriage. Nobody's ever even asked me about that.
Oh, well,
I know where they both went to school. I know that they both graduated. My dad went on to law school,
here, also in Milwaukee?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
and he was already practicing law when I was born.
I see. Are you the eldest?
I am.
And you have
One brother.
one brother, younger brother. And does he live in Milwaukee as well?
No, he lives in San Francisco.
Uh-huh.
He's been there for about 30 years.
But you stayed?
Yes.
Yeah. And what part of Milwaukee where did you grow up, and where did you go to school?
When I was born, my parents lived in Wauwatosa, and then they started moving east. We lived on 50th Street,
Right. As
Yeah.
so many did.
and then, I don't know why, but then we moved to South 22nd Street off of Greenfield,
Uh-huh.
and then we moved to the east side. And
By
so,
this time, you were about how old? Do you remember?
yes, I remember exactly. 1947, we moved to 2852 North Summit,
Uh-huh.
Summit and Locust.
And where did you go to high school?
I went to Shorewood High School.
Ah. Did you always know that you were going to be an attorney?
Yes.
Dad was an attorney, you had said that.
Well, my biological mother went to law school, but she opted for other careers. However, my dad remarried,
Mm-hmm.
which is where my second mother comes in,
Uh-huh.
and she was not a stepmother because she adopted me
I see.
after a few years. And she was a lawyer. So both parents were attorneys. So to be perfectly honest with you, I had so much fun being their son
Yeah.
that it never crossed my mind to do anything else for a primary occupation, except my father urged me to be involved in other things, and he was involved in other things, and so I did. He told me not to just be a lawyer, but to do other things. So I've done many other things and had many other professions in my life.
Uh-huh. Would you care to go into some of the other things that you've done?
Sure.
Okay. Also, and I also do want to comment that it was very unusual to have a mother at, this generation, having your mother be an attorney as well as your father must have been unusual, or not? And did you feel special?
Yes, there were only 6 women in her graduating law school class,
Yeah.
and all of them, including my mother, went on to very distinguished careers.
That's very
As a matter of fact, one of her classmates became Secretary of State of Wisconsin.
No kidding. Is she still alive?
Yes.
Really?
Hmm. Is my mother alive? or-
Yes.
Oh, no, my
No,
mother
your
passed
mother-
away a little over a year ago.
Oh. But that's really something to be proud of. That's wonderful. So, okay, so now tell me some of the other things that you've done.
Oh, I've been a professional in the real estate industry for 45 years. I presently own and operate my own real estate company. And I'm heavily involved in various organizations in the real estate profession. I have been a broadcaster
Uh-huh.
for 25 years. This is my 25th anniversary year. I have been a television producer. I'm currently in production. Your other cameraman is my cameraman.
Oh, okay.
Kurt Johnson is my cameraman.
Okay.
At the present time, we have a show that's running on cable now. Off and on throughout the years, the radio shows have been syndicated. The television shows have been syndicated through the years. I've been a professional journalist most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I've been published thousands of times. I'm presently the editor of a publication, a leading publication. It's the leading Latino newspaper in Wisconsin. It's called El Conquistador.
No kidding.
Yes. I spent 10 years as a professional race driver, winning many hundreds of races, being featured on the cover of automotive and racing magazines. I had 15 years as a professional boxing ring announcer, internationally televised, and then after the 15 years, intermittent stints as a ring announcer, including this year.
Here again in Milwaukee? Or?
Most of it,
Yeah.
but I did some national boxing tournaments 5 months ago.
Uh-huh.
That just happened to take place in Milwaukee. I have been a professional baseball umpire, and I'm currently the elected executive secretary of the Wisconsin Umpires Association, which is the biggest umpire organization of its type in Wisconsin.
Uh-huh. You like sports, obviously,
Well,
or some sports.
I do, but I have an unusual physical limitation, something that happened to me almost 40 years ago, that other than participating as an athlete, I'm not able to do that. I have not been able to do it for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, there was a big story about it in the Jewish Chronicle.
Recently, or no?
It was published in the early 90s.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah, published in the early 90s. And then I've done other things that I've always pitched into. I've been at least on a part-time basis, I've been a teacher for 41 years. I began teaching and was on the faculty at Carroll College, and I've taught or lectured at just about every college or university within 100 miles of Milwaukee, and including last week.
Law or?
No.
No.
Well, yes, sometimes it has been.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I've actually taught in 7 different disciplines. I taught law and business law, I taught real estate curriculum, I taught health and human services, I taught psychology, sociology, criminology, and I taught communications. At least those. And I've lectured on many, many other subjects. But those are the ones that I taught at universities and colleges.
That's very impressive.
Well, I'm not telling you about it because I expect anybody to be impressed.
Well, tell us a little about your Jewish background. Where you grew up, was it particularly Jewish or not Jewish? Did your family belong to a synagogue?
Of all the questions on your question sheet, that's probably the one that amused me the most.
Okay.
And I don't think you're personally, unless you drafted the sheet and didn't proof it. It's kind of funny the way it was stated on the sheet, but when I became of age, I went to Hebrew school.
Mm-hmm.
The Hebrew school at that time, the first one was at Temple Emmanuel, and then
Which was downtown at that time. It was here. It wasn't, or in the Shorewood area, or where was it?
Temple Emmanuel was on Kenwood.
I am not from Milwaukee, as you can tell.
Yes,
So,
yes.
yes, it was on where?
Where are you from?
Most recently, Florida.
Okay, well, Temple Emmanuel was across the street from the main building at UWM.
Yes,
Directly across the street on
Yes.
Kenwood.
Okay.
And I believe the university took over the building.
Yes, okay.
And then they moved out to the River Hills area,
Yeah.
around here, River Hills. I think they're in River Hills.
Right.
But I went to that Hebrew school, then we moved, and I went to the East Side Hebrew School, which was on Oakland, block north of Capitol. And then I went there for about 6 years, from age 7 to 13. And then I studied for my bar mitzvah
Mm-hmm.
with Rabbi Twersky
Mm-hmm.
of Temple Beth Yehuda,
Mm-hmm.
and I came to know the whole family. Both of my grandparents were presidents. They used to take turns each year. So for a long time, each of the two of them was president of Beth Yehuda. So that is where I had my bar mitzvah. And then in high school, I did join AZA,
Uh-huh.
and I had a lot of leadership positions with AZA from age 13 until I graduated high school. I became a AZA chapter leader, and Milwaukee had an AZA council, so I had a council leadership position. Then there was a state organization, so I had a state leadership position.
Mm-hmm.
Then AZA it was divided into districts, and I became a district leader. So I spent a lot of years with AZA. Then I went to college, and I was recruited into
Which was it here, or?
I started here,
Mm-hmm.
and then I went to Madison,
Mm-hmm.
but I spent the rest of my college and law school years at Marquette,
Oh,
which didn't have a fraternity.
okay.
But I didn't lose any of my friendships from the fraternity guys.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent a couple of years, and I was the president of the fraternity in college. And then the second year I went to UW-Madison, and then in the third year I went to Marquette and spent all the rest of my days at Marquette. When I came back from Madison. I joined Temple Sinai
Mhm.
while I was in college, and I was a member of Temple Sinai until this year. And I was active, very active there in the earlier years. I was, at one point, for 2 years, I was president of the Temple Brotherhood.
Mhm.
And I was active with committee work and whatnot.
So is your Jewishness very important to you? It sounds like you were raised in the Orthodox, or you certainly had Orthodox early training, but now you've,
I wasn't raised Orthodox at all,
oh, okay.
not at all. And to tell you the truth, other than going to temple during high holidays, I was more involved in Jewish activities than, as far as I can tell, than my parents ever were.
Uh-huh.
They belonged, enjoyed memberships in all kinds of Jewish organizations, B'nai B'rith, Hadassah,
Right.
that kind of stuff. But I didn't really see any activity,
In terms of religious observance.
no. Except during the high holidays. And that was an annual ritual.
And your bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was involved
Yeah.
with Jewish organizations pretty much throughout my life, but I don't think my parents were.
So it was something that you felt very strongly about.
Well, yes, but not for religious reasons. I mean, I enjoyed the activities, and I enjoyed the relationships, and I enjoyed the people,
Mm-hmm.
and I made lifelong friendships.
Do you think you experienced much anti-Semitism in Milwaukee growing up?
Some. In the 50s.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Which you were in school.
Right.
Yeah. How would it manifest itself?
Anti-Semitic remarks.
Did you feel distinctly a minority when you were a boy in school?
No.
No.
Sherwood had a lot of Jewish students.
Mm-hmm.
Not the most around here, but they had a lot.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that you're turning to Jewish social, activities and organizations, and was that in some way perhaps a way to buffer yourself against anti-Semitism?
No, not at all.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I was heavily involved in lots of other organizations, and I was involved in athletics.
As well. Are you a war vet?
No, I was I was 4F.
Uh-huh, I remember that.
It related back to the health problem that I had in
I see,
1965.
I see. Uh-huh, okay. And what are your feelings about Israel? Or do you have feelings about Israel?
Not much,
Have you ever been?
no.
No.
I've donated money to Israeli causes throughout my life.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had any desire to go there. The idea of it frankly, of going there is unsettling. Certainly in the last couple of decades.
Because of all the unrest there and trouble, or?
Unrest is putting it mildly. Yes.
Okay.
The murders, tourists getting murdered.
How do you see the present and the future of the Milwaukee Jewish community?
Well, first of all, it's gotten smaller.
This is true.
And I think that intermarriage is at an all-time high.
Mm-hmm.
And it's become totally acceptable, except with Orthodox Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that mindset is going to prevail. I think there'll probably come a time in the future when the Orthodox Jews will be the leading group of Jews, probably in this country. That's my prediction.
For Milwaukee as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Other than Orthodox Jews, I have a gut feeling that most parents would not object if their child today wanted to marry somebody who wasn't Jewish. That's my perception.
Do you see that as a problem or as a threat, or just as the way it is?
Just as the way it is.
Is there any lesson in life that you have learned that has carried you through, or that has profoundly influenced you in your life?
Any lesson?
Well, anything, yes. Any lesson, anything.
Quite a few.
Okay.
First of all, when you use the word lesson, I've been a habitual, perpetual student my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a speed reader. I probably read about 10,000 words a week. I often get called upon to speak before groups.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy a lot of leadership positions, and I have throughout my life. And I am constantly, because of all these things, learning things every day.
Mm-hmm.
I guess there are a few things that are kind of landmark lessons in my life. The first one is that I probably shouldn't be here at all. I shouldn't even exist. I should have been dust by now.
Why is that?
The landmark event, the first really traumatic landmark event in my life was in 1965. I was a superb athlete. Technically, I'm the same size now that I was then.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the same size now that I was in high school. The difference is that in high school and college and law school, I had muscles, and now it's all blubber. I have no muscles. And the reason that that happened is because I was a track athlete. I used to run.
Mm-hmm.
And I was training for the 1966 Olympics. I started in 65.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a good story for Jewish people.
Okay.
It may even involve a custom, a Jewish custom and tradition that you're not aware of. I was training about 1 mile from this building on the lakefront.
Mm-hmm.
There used to be a building on the lakefront on the north end of the Lincoln Memorial Drive called the Gun Club.
Mm-hmm.
And across the street from it, there was a track.
Mm-hmm.
And winter came, and when it got cold, I started running at an indoor track at Marquette University. I was in law school.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with an indoor track is it was in a gymnasium, and the track was elevated above the floor so that it was closer to the roof than it was to the floor. It was built in, like an elevated train, only it was a track around the circumference of the gym.
Mm-hmm. This is the standard.
No.
No.
And it was a concrete structure. In other words, it was about 10, 15 feet wide, and it was an oval that went around the gymnasium. And because it was concrete, they coated it with rubber. When you're running on wood, wood has some give to it,
Mm-hmm.
but whether it's coated with rubber or not, it doesn't. And runners like myself could get shin splints.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't have the magnificent Nike shoes then that we have today. And when you get shin splints, which is a pain in the shin,
Mm-hmm.
you have to stop for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, and then you get out of shape. So I didn't like that. So I went down to the lakefront. And even though it was wintertime, I ran on an outside track.
Mm-hmm.
And February is when I started in 1965. And it wasn't bitter cold. Bitter cold in Milwaukee is in January, but it was cold. And fortunately, there was no snow on the ground, so I was able to run around that track to work out. Well, you run around, you put on a bunch of layers of clothing, and you work up a sweat. And then, instead of putting a jacket down on the ground, I left it in my car. So from going to the track to the car, I'd catch cold every day. I had a towel around my neck inside my little sweatsuit.
Mm-hmm.
I'd throw on the jacket. Nevertheless, I caught cold. So every night for 3 weeks, I would go home, and before I would go to sleep, to get rid of the cold, I would pop a couple of Emprin. Ever heard of Emprin?
I've heard of it. Is it like aspirin or?
Do you know why it's vague?
No, but.
Because my doctor and I blew it off the market. That's why it's not around anymore.
Huh.
There,
Okay.
there is still an Emprin codeine, but there's no longer Emprin available on store shelves. So here's what happened. I caught cold, and I would go to bed, take a glass of water and pop some Emprin, and by morning that cold would be gone.
But
would sweat it out because of the Emprin while I was sleeping. But then I would go back and catch cold again, day after day after day. And night after night after night, I'd pop the Emprin. And people and doctors had no idea what Emprin did to you. Then I was at school, and I was sitting in the union, having lunch with my friends, who were all guys and women in professional schools at Marquette. And I got up, and I went to the lavatory, and I had a bad experience in the lavatory. I didn't understand the meaning of it, and I came out and told my friends what had happened to me, and then I went right down. And I was rushed to Mount Sinai, which was only 6 blocks away, and I was told that I was bleeding internally.
Oh, dear.
Yes. And so they did all of the state-of-the-art tests to find out why I was bleeding internally. And more important than that, they wanted to know where internally I was bleeding from. And they could not find it. They did test after test after test, state-of-the-art, top of the line, best doctor, could not find why I was bleeding. The problem with that is I was bleeding to death. And then they started giving me transfusions at Mount Sinai Hospital.
How old are you? I mean, I know you're...
1965, March, I was 23. So, first it was, and all the while they began giving me transfusions, they also kept looking for the bleeder. Where was it coming from? Well, first it was 5 transfusions, then it was 10, then it was 20, then it was 40, then it was 50, and I exhausted my blood type from the Milwaukee Blood Bank. And they had emergency announcements on television that they desperately needed blood donors. 27 guys from the law school went down to donate blood. My father was a union attorney, and my dad also had a lot of Italian friends, and a lot of the Italians went down, so I probably have more Italian blood in me, despite my heritage, my ancestry, than anything. But they gave blood to the blood bank. The blood that they gave didn't go in me.
And it goes to the bank.
And I did not have a rare blood type, but my blood type was exhausted. So the blood bank used the blood that was donated to make trades with Arizona and Montana that had a surplus of my blood type. They did a national search, and the blood was flown in. Well, I got up to almost 70 pints of blood. And the state of blood science was different than it is now. The blood today is more pure, more antiseptic. Even in recent years, prior to the AIDS epidemics, we used to read about people who got AIDS from a bad transfusion. In my case, I turned yellow. I must have gotten some bad blood, and I became jaundiced. Now the worst part. almost 70 pints of blood. At the time, that was a world record. And they had to keep doing it because I kept losing the blood. Whatever they put in came right back out of me. I was virtually bleeding to death. So the entire surgical staff had meetings, and they decided to remove the place where the bleeding should be. So first they took out a third of my stomach, because the state of the art then said that that must be where the bleeding is occurring, even though they couldn't pinpoint it. So they took out a third of my stomach. Then the bleeding continued, and they took out another third of my stomach. And they did that within a 3-day period. That's 2 major gastrointestinal surgeries. At the end of the second surgery, I was near death. My dad's favorite doctors, who were in charge of all this, there were 10 doctors in attendance at the first one, surgeons. There were 12 at the second one. My dad's 2 favorite doctors said, "Call Goodman Bensman. You're going to have to make arrangements. We can't find the bleeder. We can't stop this. And he's not going to live even if we put 200 pints of blood in him, because all of his organs are going." So my dad did what all of my ancestors would have done. He got very, very angry. He was livid. He refused to accept it. He got on the phone and he started calling all over the city, all over the state, all over the country. And I discovered after half a day of making all these calls that the best gastrointestinal surgeon in the world was right here in Milwaukee. What's the odds of that? So he then tried to get a hold of the guy. The guy's office, the guy's name was Edward Ellingson. The guy's office told my dad that Dr. Ellingson was on a plane to Philadelphia to address a medical convention. He asked him what time the plane was. They told him the plane had not taken off. My dad got in the car. He went 100 miles an hour to Mitchell Field. I didn't see it. I was busy dying at the time. But he told me. He put the proverbial pedal to the metal.
I know you're a race driver too, so yes.
And he went out to Mitchell Field. He found a way to drive out onto the runway. He found out which plane it was, and he parked his car under the nose of the plane. He got the airline to bring the staircase back. He boarded the plane, and he begged the guy to get off the plane and save me. At first, they thought this must be some kind of a nutcase, but my dad was a leading attorney, well respected. He convinced the doctor to get off the plane. The doctor came over to Mount Sinai. while he was on the way there, a priest came in to give me the last rites. It's called extreme unction. And I said, Father, I'm Jewish.
This was at Mount Sinai Hospital.
At Mount Sinai. They had 2 chaplains there, one for Christians and a rabbi. He said, well, it won't hurt.
I guess there's some truth in that, so. that
Then-
you had extreme unction.
Before he left, he said, I will notify the rabbi. Minutes later, the rabbi walked in. And he said, I'm going to pray for you. The next guy who came in was Dr. Ellingson. And Dr. Ellingson said, looked me right in the face, got about this close to my face, spoke quietly, and he said, you're dying. He said, I'm just a man. He said, I can only do so much. He said, I'm going to save you. He said, but 2 things have to take place. He said, you have to pray, and you have to fight. And then Dr. Phillips came in. Dr. Phillips was the head of anesthesiology at Mount Sinai. It's only 40 years ago. And he gave me the Notre Dame this one's for the Gipper speech, just like a coach. And he reiterated that I had to fight. Now, I'm a person all my life. I am essentially a mentally tough person. The body is shot, but the brain is good, so. I was then, and I am now, a mentally tough person. And I have a fabulous sense of humor.
Very important.
I've been able to make people cry, laugh, cheer, gasp, my whole life. Now the guy says, it's 2 in a row, tell me I gotta fight. At that point, I had 17 machines keeping me alive. They exhausted all my blood vessels, and they had cut my arms open so that my arms were stretched out on boards, padded boards, and they opened up each of my arms so that they could take blood out every half hour to try to find out what's going on. I had breathing machines, lung machines, heart machines, everything under the sun. A feeding tube. I had a tracheotomy. Obviously, this was in intensive care. To get to my body, I told you I was training for the Olympics. I weighed about 185. I was really muscular. And the doctor said that had I not been in peak athletic condition, I never would have survived any of this. To get to my body, the nurses had to raise their legs to step over equipment in the intensive care unit. Nobody could walk up to me. So the whole idea of telling me to fight, I started laughing because I was trying to figure out, how am I going to fight?
Like that.
How was I going to fight? So then, my last image in my mind that I'll never forget was my parents, my mother and father, briefly chanting, "Fight, Alan." Now comes the most interesting part of this disgusting story. Besides my parents, the closest person in the world was my grandmother, Rachel Eisenberg. And she said to my parents, and again, I didn't hear it, this is the way it was told to me, but I know it happened because many people told it to me. She took my parents aside and she said, "I know how to save him." She said, "Take me over to Twersky." So my mother and father and grandmother went over to Beth Yehuda. And Rabbi Twersky changed my name. My Hebrew name was David. I'm Alan David Eisenberg. I'm named after my great-grandfather, David Eisenberg. So my Hebrew name was David. And they did a name change ceremony. And they changed my name to David Chaim.
Life.
Now, why do you think they did that?
Well, Chaim is life.
That's only part of it.
Does it have something to do with the fighting? No, I don't know.
Because according to Jewish custom and tradition, when the angel of death comes looking, he won't find David.
And it worked.
Ridiculous, isn't it?
And it worked.
So Beth Yehuda is on the corner it's on a corner property lot. My parents were parked almost half a block away. And they almost made it to the car. And the shamus, Sam Richt, came out the door screaming, come back, it's the hospital." And my mother panicked and she said, "He's dead." So they went back and took the phone, and it was Dr. Ellingson. And Ellingson said, "The crisis has passed." And my dad said, "When was this?" And he said, 10 minutes ago. So Grandma said, "It worked." And she said, "I can't take this anymore. I got to go home. Take me home." And they said, "Don't you want to come back to the hospital?" She said, "Take me home. This is stressful to me." So they took her home, And they came back to the hospital and stood over me till I came to. And that night, Grandma died.
Hmm.
They didn't tell me about it for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Because she was close to me.
Yeah.
And when I tell this story, everybody always has the same question.
Which is?
The answer is yes, I think she gave me life and her life. Of course, this is all just a coincidence.
I don't know. Is that what you really feel? No. My thought is that I'm astonished that you didn't become very, very, very devout after that experience.
Who said I'm not devout? I never said that.
Orthodox, I suppose.
No,
No.
that has nothing to do with it. Because people are Orthodox, that doesn't necessarily make them more devout. But I have no doubt in my own mind
Mm-hmm.
that had she not had the rabbi change my name, I wouldn't have survived.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that in my
Mm-hmm.
mind, in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that she gave me her life. I'm judging by the look on your face that you were not familiar with the name change ceremony.
Not at all.
Yeah. It's been around for 1,000 years.
I'm sure maybe longer, but that's an amazing story.
Mm-hmm. It was published in the Chronicle. And then in those years, I believe that the Chronicle was part of some kind of a news service, a Jewish news service or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I got calls from people in some other cities
Yeah.
that they had read about it.
Yeah, that other.
And even though it's 40 years ago, and even though the story was published over 10 years ago, many people remember what happened to me. And then, after the surgery, I spent another 30 days in intensive care. And dozens and dozens of people worked on me, nurses, breathing therapy people, doctors. Every last one of them became my clients when I began practicing law, because they thought that I was some kind of a miracle.
I was gonna say. That's, and I'm looking, how would you like to be remembered? And I think that that's how you're going to be remembered.
Well,
Partly.
yeah. How long have you lived in Milwaukee?
3 years.
Well, almost 3 years ago, I ran for governor of this state.
That's something to be remembered for, too. Yes.
The only Jewish person ever to run for governor.
That's a big thing to be. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap this up.
That's fine.
But thank you very, very much. Very fascinating, very interesting.
Nice to have met you.
Thank you.